The hangar at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek smelled of jet fuel, coffee, and sweat, the trifecta of every deployment night. The cavernous space hummed with a low undercurrent of noise. Mechanics finishing last checks on aircraft, operators strapping down gear, the occasional clink of a magazine sliding into place. But at the far end of the hangar, in a section cordoned off for planning, a single long folding table was lit by the glare of fluorescent bulbs. Around it, the SEAL team gathered, their faces set in stone. The maps spread across the table were covered in circles and arrows, red ink bleeding into the pale paper-like wounds. The target, a fortified compound tucked in hostile territory, miles away from any safe exit. Intelligence suggested a hostage was being held inside, an American, snatched weeks earlier by a network that had made a name on cruelty. The directive from command was simple: bring him back alive. The weight of that simplicity pressed on every man in the room. At the head of the table stood the team leader, Commander Briggs, his jaw square, voice gravelly from too many years of cigarettes and desert air. "We insert by bird, 0300, he said, his finger tracing the flight path. "LZ here. Terrain's rocky, no cover, so we move fast and low. Objective is this compound. Intel gives us 30 fighters, minimum, inside the perimeter. Expect twice that." No one flinched. Numbers were guesses. Reality was always worse. Briggs paused, then scanned the room. His eyes landed briefly on the only woman in the circle. She sat straight-backed, arms crossed loosely, her expression unreadable. To some of the newer guys, she was still an anomaly, a woman wearing a trident, seated among them, about to step into hell as their equal. Her presence was both unsettling and reassuring, though none would admit it aloud. Her call sign, written neatly at the corner of the mission board, seemed to radiate its own weight. Silent Storm. Briggs didn't elaborate on her role. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew. The planning continued. Satellite photos flicked onto the screen, grainy black and white snapshots of a compound with high walls and angular shadows. Routes were traced, contingency plans laid out, comm signals reviewed. It was the usual rhythm. Heavy details delivered with mechanical precision, as if rehearsing the bones of a play no one wanted to star in. But beneath the routine, the men carried their private doubts. Ambushes were common. Hostage intelligence was often unreliable, and the odds stacked higher when navigating villages that could shift from neutral to hostile in seconds. In the corner, Silent Storm took it all in. She didn't scribble notes. She didn't interrupt with questions. Her eyes tracked every map, every photograph, storing details in silence. That was her way, absorbing everything, saying nothing, moving only when action was required. Some saw it as arrogance. Others had learned to recognize it for what it was, a lethal kind of focus. One of the younger operators, Chief Petty Officer Daniels, leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching her. He'd heard the stories, though most sounded like campfire embellishments. She'd ghosted through villages in Afghanistan, slipping past patrols like smoke. She'd called shots that saved entire patrols. She'd taken down an enemy sniper no one else could even locate. But stories were just that, stories. Tonight, he would see if Silent Storm lived up to them. Questions? Briggs barked, breaking Daniel's thoughts. A couple of hands went up. Clarifications about exfil routes, radio frequencies, fallback points. The commander answered without hesitation. When the room went still again, Briggs gave a final nod. Gear up, wheels up in 90. This one's tight and dirty, gentlemen. No screw-ups. Chairs scraped against the concrete as the men rose. The low buzz of chatter filled the hangar again, men joking in clipped bursts, masking nerves with sarcasm. Weapons were checked and rechecked, night vision goggles tested, plates strapped tighter. Each man disappeared into his ritual, a personal dance with death he'd rehearsed dozens of times. Silent Storm moved among them without a word. She checked her gear methodically, every motion deliberate. No wasted movement, no nervous tics. To watch her was to watch discipline embodied. Briggs walked past, pausing long enough to murmur, "You've got point tonight." She gave a small nod, no hesitation. That was when Daniels, still half watching her, muttered to a teammate, "Why Silent Storm?" The teammate, a wiry sniper named Cruz, smirked without humor, "Because you don't hear her coming. And when she does, you don't forget." Daniels didn't press further. The answer was enough. As the hangar doors groaned open, night air rushed in, carrying the chill of the ocean. The black silhouettes of helicopters loomed against the horizon, blades already spinning. Men strapped, helmets, tightened gloves, slung rifles across their chests. The noise rose to a roar, but even in that storm of sound, Silent Storm's silence seemed louder. Daniels glanced at her one last time as they walked toward the bird. She moved with calm certainty, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as though she'd already seen the battlefield and made peace with whatever waited there. He shook off the thought and climbed aboard. The bird lifted, vibrations rattling through the cabin. The team sat in silence, heads bowed, each man trapped in his own thoughts. But one thing tethered them all together, an unspoken awareness. Tonight would test them in ways no briefing could prepare for. And somewhere in the quiet of that flight, Daniels realized he wasn't just wondering whether Silent Storm lived up to her name. He was beginning to hope she did. Because deep down, in the gut where instincts live, he felt something heavy, something unspoken. They would need her. Whispers carried faster than truth in the teams. At Little Creek, Coronado, or any dusty forward operating base overseas, her name always traveled ahead of her. Operators who had never even laid eyes on her spoke, like they knew her story, their words blending all with skepticism. She only made it through Bud S because the brass wanted a headline. No way she could have survived. Hell Week without help. She won't last a deployment with a real team. Not in the suck. The words always came the same way, behind her back, in low mutters shared between men sharpening knives or cleaning rifles. Yet none ever said it to her face. Maybe it was respect. Maybe fear. Silent Storm never answered the rumors. She didn't need to. The truth of her journey began years earlier on the cold beaches of Coronado. Bud S, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, had broken stronger men than most people would ever meet. Every year, hundreds tried. Dozens quit before the first week ended. A handful made it through the infamous Hell Week, 5.5 days of near constant motion, with only 4 hours of sleep in total. The Pacific Ocean swallowed the week, spat them back out shivering and defeated. She hadn't just survived Hell Week. She had outpaced half the class. While others groaned, cursed, or begged instructors for relief, she remained silent. Not once did she ring the brass bell that stood temptingly near the chow hall, the symbol of surrender. Instructors had tried to break her harder than anyone. They didn't hide it. Longer surf torture, heavier boats carried on her shoulders, louder jeers thrown in her face. They wanted her to crack, to prove the critics right. But she didn't crack. She moved through every evolution with a quiet intensity, eyes forward, body trembling but unyielding. By the end of Bud S, the whispers had already begun. She's different. She doesn't talk, she doesn't brag. She just endures. It was then the first version of her nickname appeared, Storm. Her combat deployments sharpened the name further. Afghanistan, Syria, and places never listed on any official map. She was sent where chaos reigned. And in chaos, she thrived. On one night patrol in Helmand, Her unit had been pinned down by machine gun fire from an orchard. Visibility was near zero, tracer fire carving red arcs across the night. Men huddled behind crumbling walls, pinned, unable to move. Radios crackled with panic. And she was gone. At first, no one noticed. She slipped into the shadows without a word, crawling low through the dust, weaving through irrigation ditches until she flanked the shooters. Minutes later, silence fell. 3 muffled pops of suppressed fire ended the ambush. When she reappeared, calm as ever, her face streaked with dirt, she didn't explain. She didn't need to. Her team realized then that she was more than just endurance. She was precision. She was the storm that arrived without warning, devastating and unseen. The call sign evolved. Silent storm. But call signs weren't just about skill. They carried weight, meaning, and reputation. By her 3rd deployment, hers had spread far beyond her platoon. Other operators repeated it in low tones, sometimes with respect, sometimes with envy. Some still doubted. Old traditions die hard. Daniels, the young SEAL who now shared a bench across from her on the bird heading into hostile territory, had been one of those doubters. Back in Virginia, during training blocks, he'd watched her quietly dominate every drill. Marksmanship, tactics, endurance. She matched or exceeded the men around her. Still, he told himself, real combat is different. Training doesn't bleed. Yet the men who had bled beside her told a different story. Cruz, the wiry sniper, had once shared a story over beers. We were in Marja, he'd said, pinned in a mud compound, RPGs slamming walls around us. Thought we were done. Then she calls targets on comms, cool as ice. Not panicked, not screaming. Just calling shots. Like she'd seen the whole fight play out before it happened. We walked out of there because of her. Daniels had laughed it off at the time, chalking it up to barroom exaggeration. But now, on the edge of a mission where survival was measured in seconds, he wasn't so sure. The woman behind the call sign remained a mystery, even to those who fought beside her. She rarely spoke outside operational necessity. She didn't drink much, didn't brag about missions, didn't linger when the others swapped war stories late into the night. Some mistook her silence for coldness, others for arrogance. But the ones who'd seen her work knew it was neither. She lived in the storm, but never invited anyone into it. Commander Briggs had recognized her value early. While others debated whether she belonged, he had made it clear, she's here because she earned it. Full stop. His backing silenced many critics, but not all. Even now, on the eve of this mission, Briggs noticed the glances exchanged between some of the younger men. Doubt lingered in their eyes. Doubt could be deadly in combat. But Briggs trusted her. He'd seen her deliver when lives balanced on a knife's edge. And tonight, lives would again. As the team prepared gear, the weight of her reputation hung heavy. Every SEAL had earned their place, but hers came with a story none could replicate. She had walked through the gauntlet of history, carrying the burden of being first, of being doubted, of being watched more closely than any of them. And she had not just survived it. She had carved her name into it. That was why, when Briggs pointed to her on the mission board, no one argued. She was on point. She would lead them into the dark. Daniels tried to shrug off his unease, but the thought pressed harder now. If the whispers are true, if she really is Silent Storm, then maybe that's the reason we'll make it out alive. The rotors above roared louder, vibrating through steel and bone. The bird was ready, and so was she. The helicopter's interior rattled like a metal drum as the Black Hawk lifted into the night. Vibrations climbed up the spines of the SEALs strapped into their benches, each man holding tight to his rifle, their heads bowed in the green glow of interior lights. The roar of the twin engines was deafening, but no one spoke anyway. They didn't need to. This was the ritual silence before stepping into the unknown. Commander Briggs sat near the crew chief, eyes scanning a tablet displaying their flight path. The bird would skim the terrain, hugging valleys and ridgelines to stay invisible to enemy radar. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Wheels down, 25 mics. The words hung heavy in the cabin. 25 minutes until boots hit dirt. 25 minutes until the mission shifted from briefing to reality. Silent Storm sat near the ramp, helmet pulled low, night vision goggles flipped up for now. She looked outward, past the door gunner, into the night sky. To Daniels, sitting across from her, it was uncanny how calm she appeared. Most SEALs braced themselves during insertions, rehearsing mental checklists, flexing hands, biting nerves. She simply sat still, her breathing slow, steady, as though she was already on the ground, already moving ahead in some invisible rhythm only she could hear. The rest of the team cycled through their rituals. Cruz tapped his magazine against his thigh in time with the vibrations. Morales whispered a prayer, lips barely moving. Daniels rolled his shoulders, fighting tension. Each man carried the same awareness. The enemy didn't know they were coming, but when they landed, that ignorance would be temporary. At 19 minutes out, the Black Hawk dipped suddenly, skimming low over the desert floor. Dust streaked the windows. Night vision bathed the landscape in pale green. Jagged ridges, winding gullies, barren flats that seemed to stretch forever. Somewhere out there, a compound waited, its walls filled with men who would kill without hesitation. Daniels glanced again at Silent Storm. She was adjusting her rifle with small, practiced motions, her face lit in ghostly green under the NVGs. No wasted movements, no fumbles. She moved like someone who had done this 100 times, maybe more. He looked away, chewing on the thought. Part of him still wondered if she was more legend than reality. But as the bird roared on, another part, the gut instinct soldiers learned not to ignore, whispered that she was exactly what her name claimed. 12 mics out, the pilot announced. Briggs raised a hand, signaling final checks. Rifles clacked as charging handles were pulled, bolts racked forward, optics cleaned with gloved thumbs. Grenades were patted down in their pouches, knives checked, radios tested with quick bursts of static. The weight of their gear pressed heavy, yet comforting, a shield they trusted more than luck. Silent Storm slid her NVGs into place, eyes vanishing behind twin green orbs. The transformation was subtle, but absolute. She was no longer a soldier waiting. She was a hunter preparing. The pilot's voice returned, strained over the roar. Approaching LZ, the Black Hawk flared, rotors chopping the night, dust exploding upward in a choking cloud. The ramp dropped with a metallic bang. One by one, the SEALs spilled into the darkness, crouching low, rifles up, boots crunching against loose stone. The bird didn't linger. Within seconds, it lifted back into the sky, its thunder fading until the desert swallowed it whole. And then came the silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but waiting. The squad formed up quickly, eyes sweeping the horizon. Ahead stretched miles of rugged terrain, jagged rocks, dry washes, steep ridges. Under night vision, the world glowed eerie and alien, every shadow a potential threat. Silent Storm took point without a word. She moved low and deliberate, each step calculated, boots finding solid purchase on the uneven ground. Her body language radiated calm, and the men fell into formation behind her, letting her pace set theirs. For Daniels, the effect was strange. Fear always lived in those first moments after insertion. Fear of being spotted, of walking blind into the jaws of the enemy. But trailing behind Silent Storm, he felt an unexpected steadiness. It was as if her silence absorbed the doubt around her, replacing it with focus. They moved fast but quiet, navigating gullies and dry creek beds. Every so often, Silent Storm paused, raising a fist, scanning the horizon with slow precision. Each halt felt less like caution and more like certainty, as if she sensed something others couldn't. When she moved again, the team followed without question. Hours passed in the rhythm of tactical movement. Low steps, brief halts, whispered hand signals. Sweat trickled under armor, soaking shirts, yet no one complained. The compound loomed closer now, a dark silhouette against the horizon, its high walls cutting sharp lines under the moonlight. Still, something gnawed at the edges of the night. Daniels felt it first, that creeping instinct, the primal awareness that things were too quiet. He glanced at Morales, saw the same unease flicker in his eyes. Even Cruz, usually grinning behind his rifle, had grown serious. But Silent Storm? She only slowed her pace, scanning more intently. Her head tilted slightly, listening for something no one else heard. The men felt their own nerves tighten. If she was unsettled, something was wrong. They reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the final stretch of terrain before the compound. Briggs signaled a halt, crouching low. The squad gathered, eyes on the target. Through NVGs, the compound appeared deceptively calm. No movement on the walls. No patrols visible in the courtyards. No distant voices carried on the wind. "Looks empty," Daniels whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Briggs frowned. No such thing. Silent Storm stayed crouched at the edge, her rifle steady, eyes fixed on the compound. Her silence stretched long, heavy. Then, finally, she shifted, just enough for Briggs to notice. A subtle shake of her head. No words, no explanations. But in that small gesture, the warning was clear. The compound was waiting for them. The men adjusted grips on their rifles, breaths deepening, adrenaline tightening every muscle. The night felt different now, not empty, but charged. As they prepared to move again, Daniels realized the truth he had tried to deny since Virginia. Silent Storm wasn't just calm. She was tuned to something beyond them, something the rest of the team could only sense dimly. And in that moment, he understood why her call sign carried such weight. Because sometimes storms don't announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they arrive in silence, just before everything breaks. The desert night was still when the team crept down from the ridge toward the compound. Moonlight clung to the walls like silver paint, illuminating the high stone perimeter. No guards walked the parapets. No voices carried from within. To Daniels, it felt like stepping onto a stage where the curtains had risen, but the actors hadn't shown up yet. "Too quiet," Cruz muttered over the comms, his voice low. Briggs raised a fist, halting the squad. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the structure. SEALs lived by instincts honed over countless missions, and his were screaming now. Silent Storm was crouched at the front, rifle raised, eyes locked on the compound's gate. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. She didn't move, didn't speak, but the silence around her felt heavier, like she could hear the storm coming before the first crack of thunder. "Commander," Daniels whispered. "What's the play?" Before Briggs could answer, the night ripped open. Gunfire exploded from the rocks on both sides, muzzles flaring like fireflies in the dark. Tracer rounds cut the air, glowing red streaks hissing overhead. Dirt and stone erupted around them as bullets chewed the ground. The SEALs dove for cover, the air filled with the staccato roar of machine guns. "Contact left and right." Cruz bellowed, already returning fire. Daniels slammed into the dirt, heart hammering. The sound was overwhelming, the tearing thunder of automatic weapons, the hiss of rounds ripping through the night, the shouts of teammates scrambling to cover. Adrenaline burned through his veins, narrowing the world to green-tinted NVG images and the hammering of his rifle. The enemy had them in a perfect kill box. For a split second, chaos reigned. Men cursed, shouted over radios, fired blind into shadows. The ambush was too precise, too well planned. They hadn't stumbled into resistance. They had walked into a trap. And then, through the storm, came a voice. Calm. Even. 3 o'clock. Left flank, suppress now. Daniels, shift fire, rooftop, compound wall. It was Silent Storm. Her tone cut through panic like a scalpel. No shouting, no panic, just precision. The men obeyed instinctively, adjusting fire as directed. Suppressive bursts tore into the rocks, forcing enemy shooters to duck. Cruz, high ground, 11 o'clock. Take him. One shot cracked from Cruz's rifle, and an enemy machine gun fell silent. Morales, smoke out left. Move on my mark. A hiss filled the night as smoke canisters popped, shrouding their flank. Within 30 seconds, the chaos had shape. Fear gave way to rhythm. Daniels glanced sideways and caught sight of her. Silent Storm moved low and fluid, sliding behind a boulder, firing in short, controlled bursts. She didn't waste ammunition. Every shot was deliberate, every adjustment measured. She was seeing the battlefield in a way no one else could, like she had mapped it long before they arrived. Push left now, she commanded. The squad shifted, bounding in pairs through smoke and dust, gaining ground where seconds earlier they had been pinned. Daniels followed her lead, his rifle spitting bursts at shadows that moved just beyond the haze. Bullets cracked past his helmet, stone chips slicing his cheek, but the fear dulled. Her voice anchored him. The ambush grew fiercer. From the compound itself, new fire erupted, more muzzle flashes, more tracers screaming through the dark. The enemy wasn't just dug in on the ridges. They were pouring out of the gate, streaming onto the open ground in front of the walls. Contact front, 50 meters. Briggs barked. Frag out. Morales shouted, lobbing a grenade that lit the night with fire and concussion. The shockwave rattled teeth, but it bought them seconds. Seconds Silent Storm used. Cruz, suppress gate. Daniels, Morales, push right with me. They obeyed without question. She surged forward, sliding across dirt into a firing position that seemed suicidal, but her angles cut perfectly into the attacker's advance. Daniels found himself firing where she pointed, cutting down targets he hadn't even registered until they fell. The line held. Minutes stretched into lifetimes. Ammunition pouches grew lighter. Sweat poured beneath armor. The smell of burned powder clung to the air, mixing with dust and blood. Yet through it all, her presence never wavered. Every order she gave was short, precise, and right. Shift fire, rooftop left, reload now, I'll cover. 2 down, right alley clear. Daniels realized something terrifying. Without her, they'd already be dead. The trap had been perfect, the kill box sealed. But her clarity had cracked it open, giving them a fighting chance. For the first time since the ambush began, he believed they might survive. The firefight ebbed, not because the enemy relented, but because the SEALs had carved their way into cover, a dry wadi that gave partial shelter. Breathing hard, Briggs regrouped the team, voices rasping over radios. We're still in it, he said, eyes scanning their dwindling ammo. We push to the compound or we don't leave at all. Silent Storm crouched beside him, rifle steady. Her silence spoke volumes. She was ready. Daniels caught himself staring again. Her face was calm beneath the NVGs, dirt-streaked but unshaken. She wasn't fearless. He could see the sweat, the tension in her jaw. But she was composed in a way that steadied the entire team. He understood it now. Why the whispers carried her name. Why Briggs trusted her. Why they called her Silent Storm? Because in the middle of fire and death, when chaos consumed lesser soldiers, she didn't just fight. She led. The gunfire picked up again, echoing from the compound walls. Shadows shifted behind the gates. Reinforcements. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. And for the first time, Daniels wasn't afraid. Not while she was still standing. The wadi gave them cover, but it was fragile, shallow, crumbling, no more than a ditch carved by years of rain. Bullets snapped overhead, smacking into stone, spraying grit across helmets. The squad crouched low, rifles tight against shoulders, breath ragged. Every man knew, if they stayed here, they'd be buried here. Briggs wiped dust from his NVGs, scanning the field. The compound loomed 100 yards ahead, walls lit with muzzle flashes. Enemy fighters poured from the gate in waves, their shouts carried on the night wind. From the ridges behind, suppressive fire rained down like hail. They were boxed in again. And then Silent Storm moved. She rose just high enough to peer over the lip of the wadi. Her silhouette was steady, unflinching, even as tracers ripped past. Through her optics, she scanned left, then right, then up. Daniels crouched near her, watching, waiting for her to speak. When she did, her voice was calm, precise. Crews, 2 shooters, High Ridge, 11 o'clock. Take them. Cruz didn't hesitate. His rifle cracked once, twice. The ridge fell silent. Morale's grenade front, 30 meters. The thump of the launcher echoed, followed by an explosion that lit the desert like lightning. Screams cut through the haze. Daniels, she said, without looking at him, with me. Before he could protest, she vaulted from the ditch, moving low and fast, rifle tucked, boots kicking up dust. Daniel's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He followed, lungs burning, rounds snapping past. They dove behind a cluster of boulders, closer to the enemy line. She didn't waste a second. Suppress left. I'll move right. Her tone wasn't a request. It was certainty. Daniels leaned out, firing controlled bursts. Shadows dropped near the gate. From the corner of his eye, he saw her slip right, moving with fluid precision. She fired 2 shots, 2 kills, then vanished behind another rock. He blinked. She hadn't just moved. She'd flowed, as if the terrain was guiding her. Overcomes, Briggs barked. Storm status? Her reply came steady. Left flank collapsing. Push forward on my mark. No hesitation, no doubt. Just orders. The squad adjusted, firing where she directed. Suppressive bursts cut down advancing fighters. The enemy's rhythm faltered, their momentum broken by precision they hadn't expected. Daniels reloaded, hands fumbling with the magazine, adrenaline making his fingers clumsy. Before he could slam the mag home, Silent Storm was at his side, covering him with fire. Her rifle barked in steady cadence, never frantic, each shot purposeful. Breathe, she said softly, almost lost under the gunfire. Daniels did. His hands steadied. Mag seated. Bolt forward. He was back in the fight. Minutes stretched, every second carved in fire and blood. The team moved by bounds, 10 yards at a time, weaving through rocks and shallow gullies. Silent Storm was always at the point, always the first to rise, the first to move, the first to fire. At one point, an enemy squad tried to flank them from the ridge. Daniel spotted them too late, panic spiking, but she was already pivoting, rifle raised. 3 suppressed cracks echoed. The squad collapsed before they could fire a shot. Right clear, she reported, her tone as level as if she were calling training drills. The compound loomed larger now, walls scarred by impacts, gates splintered from explosions. The enemy's fire slackened, scattered, less coordinated. They hadn't expected resistance this strong. Briggs seized the moment. All teams push forward. Storm's led, move. They surged together, a wall of controlled violence cutting through the last stretch of ground. Grenades arced, rifles hammered, boots pounded dirt. Silent Storm carved paths through choke points, pointing, directing, eliminating threats before they could materialize. Daniels followed in her shadow, his disbelief giving way to awe. She wasn't guessing where the enemy would move. She knew. It was as though she had walked this battlefield before, rehearsed it in silence, and now played it out with unshakable precision. The team reached the compound wall, pressed tight against stone. Breaths came in ragged gasps, sweat pouring under armor, but they were alive. Against impossible odds, they had broken the ambush. Briggs crouched beside Silent Storm, his voice low. "You just saved our asses." She said nothing, only reloaded, eyes scanning upward toward the dark rooftops. Daniels, chest heaving, leaned back against the wall, rifle heavy in his hands. He stared at her, trying to piece together what he just witnessed. The whispers, the stories, the call sign, they weren't exaggerations. They were understatements. Inside the compound, new movement stirred. Shadows slipped across rooftops, rifles glinting in the pale light. The mission wasn't over. But something had shifted. The trap had been sprung, the storm had answered, and the team wasn't broken. They were alive, moving forward, carrying momentum the enemy hadn't expected. Daniels tightened his grip on his rifle, heart steady now. For the first time since landing, he wasn't just hoping they'd make it. He believed they would, because Silent Storm wasn't just leading them through the fight. She was the fight. The compound wall loomed over them, rough stone pressed cold against armor. Gunfire echoed from the ridges, but the ambush outside had broken. Now the danger waited inside, higher walls, tighter corners, and enemies who knew the terrain like their own blood. Briggs leaned close, whispering into comms. "Stack up. We breach on Storm's mark." The seals pressed in tight, rifles angled, eyes sharp under NVGs. The smell of spent powder clung to their gear, mixing with dust and sweat. No one spoke above a whisper. Their breathing was the only sound. Silent Storm stepped to the front. She raised her fist, then pointed at the gate, splintered from earlier grenades. Her voice came low, level. "Flash, left side. 2-second push." "Daniels, you're second in." Daniels' gut tightened. He gave a short nod. Cruz prepped the flashbang, his hands steady despite the shaking earth around them. With a twist of his wrist, he lobbed it through the crack in the gate. The night split with white fire and thunder. Go. They surged through the breach in a wave of violence. Rifles hammered, boots pounded stone. Daniels blinked against the fading burn of the flash, rifle snapping to targets as shadows stumbled in the glare. 2 men went down before they could fire. Silent Storm flowed forward, sliding into cover by a stone column, firing in precise bursts. Her movements were almost eerie, never wasted, never frantic. She didn't fight the chaos. She shaped it. Clear left. She called. Right clear. Cruz echoed. Move second room. The team flowed deeper. The compound's interior was a labyrinth, narrow halls, broken staircases, dark corners that could hide death in a heartbeat. They moved slow, deliberate, rifles sweeping every angle. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. Every doorway felt like a trap, every shadow a rifle muzzle. But Storm never faltered. She led with an uncanny awareness, her rifle always aimed where the threat would appear a half-second before it did. They reached a reinforced door at the center of the compound. Muffled voices came from behind it, urgent, panicked. Briggs tapped his comms. Target room. Hostage should be inside. Silent Storm crouched at the door, pressing a gloved hand to the wood. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening. Then she opened them again. One guard inside, right corner. Second at the back wall. Daniels, you're with me. Rest cover the hall. Daniel stared. How could she know? But Briggs didn't question. Neither did the team. Cruz placed a charge, whispering, "Set." Silent Storm gave the signal. The door blew inward with a thunderclap. Smoke and splinters filled the air. Storm and Daniels surged in together, rifles raised. She fired first. One shot, the guard in the right corner dropped. Daniel's sights caught the second man near the back wall, muzzle rising. He squeezed, felt the kick, saw the man collapse. And then he saw her. The hostage. A woman bound, gagged, eyes wide with terror. Dirt streaked her face, her wrists raw from restraints. She flinched against the wall as the firefight ended in a heartbeat. Hostage secure? Silent Storm called over comms, already moving to cut her bonds. Her hands worked fast, but gentle, voice low, steady. You're safe. We're here. Daniels covered the doorway, adrenaline coursing like fire. The compound echoed with shouts now, enemy fighters realizing their prize was slipping away. Extraction, Briggs ordered. Now, the team fell into a diamond around the hostage, rifles outward. Silent Storm took point again, guiding them through the twisting halls. The woman stumbled at first, legs weak from captivity, but Storm steadied her with a hand at her shoulder. Gunfire erupted from the courtyard. Shadows poured in, rifles flashing. The SEALs answered with brutal precision, clearing the way in controlled bursts. Grenades shook the walls, echoing like thunder in a canyon. Push left. Briggs barked. Negative, Silent Storm cut in. Her tone wasn't louder, but it carried more weight. Right side's thinner. We break there. For a moment, Briggs hesitated. Then he nodded. Storm's call. Move right. They pivoted, shifting into a narrow alley where the enemy pressed less heavily. Silent Storm led, weaving through broken stone and fallen beams, firing in sharp bursts that forced attackers to duck or die. Daniel's heart pounded as he followed, the hostage stumbling between Morales and Cruz. Rounds ricocheted off stone, sparks flashing. Every second felt borrowed. At one point, a fighter burst from a side door, rifle raised. Daniels froze too slow, but Silent Storm was faster. Her rifle cracked once, the man dropped, and she never broke stride. They reached the outer wall. Freedom lay beyond, but so did death. More fighters had regrouped outside, blocking escape routes with suppressive fire. The team pressed against the wall, pinned again. Rounds smacked stone, cutting the air with sharp snaps. We need a hole, Briggs growled. On it, Silent Storm knelt, pulling a charge from her pack. Her hands moved fast, methodical, planting explosives against the weak point in the wall. She glanced back once, eyes meeting Briggs. On deck, we move. No hesitation. Briggs nodded. Storm detonated. The wall blew open in a shower of stone and fire. Dust and smoke cloaked the gap, turning night into a choking haze. Without waiting, Silent Storm surged through, rifle raised, clearing left, then right. Clear. Move. The team pushed the hostage through, boots kicking up dirt as they burst into open desert once again. But the enemy wasn't done. Fighters poured from the compound, chasing hard, muzzle flashes sparking in the night. Tracers hissed past, cutting dangerously close. Daniels stumbled, nearly dragging the hostage down with him. Then a hand grabbed his harness, yanking him upright. Silent Storm, eyes blazing through her NVGs, shoved him forward. Run! They sprinted across the sand, lungs burning, ear dragging at every step. Behind them, the compound roared with fire and fury. Ahead, the extraction point glowed faintly on their GPS salvation, if they could reach it. The team laid down suppressive fire as they moved, bursts of lead cutting into the pursuers. But the enemy pressed relentless, firing wildly, desperate not to lose their captive. Daniel's chest burned, his vision tunneling. He thought he might collapse until he heard her voice again. Calm, unbroken, 50 meters. Almost there. Keep moving. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't frantic. But it steadied him like nothing else. They reached the edge of the ridge where their extraction bird waited, rotors thundering, wind whipping sand into a storm. The helicopter's side gunners opened fire, stitching the ground with light. The enemy faltered, scattered by the overwhelming roar. The team surged forward, hauling the hostage inside, collapsing into the bird's belly. Silent Storm was the last aboard, covering with her rifle until the last second. Then she swung in, slapped the side, and the helicopter lifted. Daniel slumped against the wall of the bird, chest heaving, ears ringing from the roar. The hostage clung to Morales, sobbing alive. Briggs met eyes with each man, a grim smile tugging his lips. They'd done it. Against every odd, they had pulled her out. Daniels turned his head. Across the cabin, Silent Storm sat with her rifle across her knees, helmet tilted down, breathing steady. No words, no celebration. Just silence. But Daniels understood now. They hadn't survived because of luck. They were still alive because of her. Because she was Silent Storm. The helicopter roared into the night sky, its rotors chopping the desert air into a deafening storm. The world below shrank into a patchwork of dunes and shadows. Inside the bird, the SEALs huddled against the steel walls, their armor scarred, faces smeared with sweat and dust. The hostage sat between Morales and Cruz, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she clutched a canteen, eyes darting between the men who had dragged her from hell. Every shudder of the helicopter made her flinch, but Morales murmured low words, steadying her. Daniel sat across from Silent Storm. His rifle rested between his knees, his hands shaking so violently he had to lace his fingers to hide it. The adrenaline crash was brutal. His body wanted to collapse, but his mind replayed the ambush, the compound, the narrow escapes. Through it all, Silent Storm sat motionless. Her helmet tilted down, NVGs flipped up, her eyes hidden in shadow. She breathed slow, even breaths, her rifle balanced across her lap. She looked like stone carved into the shape of a warrior. No words, no boasting, no shaking hands. Daniels wanted to speak, to say something, gratitude, awe, disbelief, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say to someone like her? To the reason they were still breathing? Cruz broke the silence first. He leaned his head back, exhaling hard. That was a goddamn slaughterhouse. Morales snorted, shaking his head. Trap was perfect. We should have been buried out there. Briggs, sitting near the door, gave a slow nod. His voice was steady but heavy. We weren't, because of her. All eyes shifted to Silent Storm. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge the words. Her silence was louder than any answer. The flight back stretched long. The desert rolled endlessly beneath them, broken only by ridges and dry riverbeds. The crew chief shouted updates, his voice muffled by the thunder of the rotors. The hostage dozed fitfully, exhaustion finally dragging her under. Daniel's mind refused to rest. He kept seeing her, Silent Storm, in the firefight, calling calm orders when chaos was swallowing them whole, shooting men he hadn't even noticed, dragging him up when he stumbled. He thought back to the whispers before the mission. They say she sees battles before they happen. They say she's the reason squads come back when they shouldn't. He had laughed them off. Not anymore. Now he believed every word. They touched down at the forward operating base just before dawn. The horizon was painted in pale streaks of orange and violet, the desert still cool before the heat of day. Dust billowed as the bird settled, kicking grit across the landing pad. Medics rushed forward, pulling the hostage from the cabin, checking her vitals, rushing her away on a stretcher. She clung briefly to Morale's hand before disappearing into the medical tent. The SEALs disembarked slowly, boots heavy on the tarmac. Their bodies were whole, but their faces carried the weight of what they had endured. Briggs gathered them near the hangar. His gaze swept the squad, lingering on each man. "We walked into a trap," he said, voice low, "and we walked back out. That doesn't happen. Not without discipline. Not without leadership." His eyes shifted to Silent Storm. She kept this team alive tonight. The squad didn't cheer. They didn't clap shoulders or whoop like victors. They stood in silence, the weight of his words pressing into them. They all knew it was true. Every single man had felt the moment when panic threatened to break them, and the calm voice in their ear had pulled them back. Silent Storm said nothing. She simply shouldered her rifle, her eyes unreadable under the dawn light. Then she turned and walked toward the barracks. Daniels watched her go, his chest tight. The debrief came hours later. The team sat in a dim room, stripped of gear, sweat salt still clinging to their skin. Maps and photographs lay across the table. Intelligence officers hovered, asking sharp questions. "What resistance did you face? How many fighters? How were you ambushed?" Briggs answered, his tone clipped. The others filled in details where needed. But when the questions turned toward the firefight itself, all eyes eventually drifted to her. Silent Storm sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. When she spoke, her words were minimal, direct. Ambush, high ridges. Suppressive fire. We broke right, used smoke. Breached compound, secured hostage, exfil under heavy pursuit. Her voice was calm, stripped of any flourish. She didn't mention the chaos. She didn't mention saving Daniels, or the kill shots that kept the team alive, or the decisions that carved their path through hell. She simply reported the facts. The officers nodded, scribbling notes. They didn't know. They couldn't know. But the squad did. When the debrief ended, the men filtered out, voices low, exhaustion dragging at their steps. Daniels lingered, his mind torn. He wanted to speak to her, to thank her, to say that he finally understood the weight of her call sign. But when he turned, she was already gone, silent as ever. That night, Daniels lay awake in his bunk. The base was quiet, save for the distant hum of generators and the occasional thump of helicopters coming and going. The room smelled of oil, sweat, and dust, the scent of men who lived too close to death. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts racing. He had seen combat before, seen men fight and die, but never like this. Never with a leader who seemed to bend chaos itself, who pulled them through when every law of war said they should have fallen. He finally understood why Briggs had trusted her, why whispers of her name carried through the teams. Silent Storm wasn't just a call sign. It was a truth. She moved unseen, spoke little, and yet when the storm came, she was the reason others survived it. Daniels closed his eyes, exhaustion finally dragging him under. And for the first time in weeks, he slept without fear. The days after the mission blurred together. The base thrummed with its usual rhythm, helicopters roaring in and out, boots pounding gravel, radios crackling with coded chatter. But for the men who had walked through that ambush, nothing felt the same. The hostage was safe, flown out under heavy escort. Intelligence analysts dissected the mission, piecing together maps and reports. Official briefings chalked it up as successful, high resistance, enemy losses significant. But the squad knew better. They knew it hadn't been chance, or firepower, or luck that had carried them home. It had been her. Silent storm. Daniels sat on a crate outside the barracks one night, boots dusty, rifle stripped and cleaned beside him. The desert stretched into the dark, endless and quiet. Stars burned overhead like frost on black glass. He thought back to the first time he heard her call sign, just days before the mission. The older guys had whispered it with something between reverence and disbelief. He'd smirked, brushing it off as myth-making. Now he knew. He'd seen her stand in the middle of chaos, unflinching, voice steady while bullets tore the air. He'd seen her cut through fire and smoke as if the battlefield bent to her will. He'd seen her drag them out of an ambush no one should have survived. And he knew one truth. The SEALs were alive because of her. Inside the mess hall, the others carried themselves differently too. Cruz, usually quick with jokes, was quieter now, his eyes sharper. Morales, who'd always been brash, seemed steadier, his edges tempered. Even Briggs, the iron-willed commander, glanced at Storm with something close to respect, respect that wasn't spoken, but lived in the way he deferred to her instinct without hesitation. The squad didn't need to say it aloud. They all knew. Silent Storm had changed them. Word traveled fast in places like this. Other units leaned in when they passed, curious. Stories spread, some true, some bent by rumor. She broke an ambush twice her size. She saw the shooters before they moved. She carried 2 men out on her shoulders. Daniels listened to the whispers, half amused, half awed. He knew the truth was simpler and heavier than the rumors. She hadn't been invincible. She hadn't been magical. She'd just been unshakable. And in war, sometimes that was the difference between living and dying. The official recognition came a week later. In a cramped hangar lit by harsh fluorescence, the squad stood in formation while brass from command rattled off citations. Commendations were pinned, hands shaken, photographs snapped for reports that would circulate back home. The hostages' rescue was praised as a critical victory. Briggs received his due for leadership. The squad was commended for bravery under fire. But when they called her name, her real name, not the call sign, the room shifted. Officers spoke her deeds in sterile words, but the men who had bled beside her felt the weight behind them. Exemplary conduct, tactical composure, actions above and beyond. Daniels watched her step forward, shoulders squared, eyes calm. She accepted the commendation with a nod, then stepped back into line without a word. No speech, no smile. Silent as always. That night, the squad gathered by the fire pit near the edge of the base. It wasn't a celebration. No music, no laughter, but a quiet ritual. Cigars were passed, whiskey shared from dented flasks. The desert wind carried the smoke upward, twisting into the stars. Daniels sat across from her. She smoked slow, gaze fixed on the horizon, the flames painting her face in amber light. Finally, he spoke. His voice was rough, hesitant. "You saved my life out there?" More than once. Her eyes shifted to him, calm, unreadable. For a heartbeat, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, simply, "You saved mine too." Nothing more. No weighty speeches, no lectures. Just truth, plain and quiet. And that was enough. Weeks later, the squad rotated home. Planes carried them across oceans, bases, and time zones until they touched U.S. soil. Families embraced their sons, husbands, brothers. Smiles, tears, laughter. Daniels stood among them, the chaos of reunion swirling around him, but his mind wandered back to the desert, to the ambush, to the calm voice in his comms that had pulled him back from the edge. He knew the others felt it too. They were different now. They carried the mark of her leadership, even when she wasn't near. Because some people left scars, and some left legacies. Months later, Daniel sat in a briefing room for a new mission. Maps sprawled across the table, photos clipped, objectives outlined. He listened with half an ear, his focus broken when a new call sign floated across the room. Storms attached? Someone whispered. Daniels looked up. She was there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, calm as ever. His chest tightened. Relief washed through him. Because he knew something most men didn't. He knew that when the firefight came, and it always came, the difference between death and survival wasn't luck or firepower, or even skill. It was her. Silent storm. The reason men came home when they shouldn't. The storm that spoke softly and changed everything. And as long as she walked into battle with them, Daniels knew one truth, burned brighter than any medal, brighter than any report. They would live. Because she was Silent Storm, and her legacy was survival.